Everyone called it a Class 20 Deathworld. The Space Marines didn't give a f***. If you are not a heretic, then declare your city of origin. Leave a comment, a like, and subscribe to the Emperor's Glory. At the conclusion, rate this tale from 0 to 10. The Emperor protects. The Vox crackle cut through the silence of the bridge like a blade through flesh. Captain Velox of the Feline Sovereignty's reconnaissance vessel's silent pounce felt his ears flatten against his skull as the transmission filtered through the ship's ancient speakers. "This is Scout Pack Theta 7. Emperor's blood. They're everywhere. The trees are moving. Request immediate evacuation from coordinates." Static consumed the rest. Velox's amber eyes flicked to his navigation officer, a younger Tom named Whiskers, who was frantically adjusting sensors with trembling paws. "How many is that now?" 17th expedition lost to Mortis 7 in the past solar cycle, sir. Whisker's voice barely rose above the hum of the ship's systems. The Canine Federation lost 3 destroyers just trying to establish orbital surveillance. The Bovine Collective won't even acknowledge the planet exists anymore. Through the viewport, Mortis 7 hung like a malevolent eye in space. Its surface writhed with perpetual storms, and even from orbit, the sensor readings were wrong. Gravity fluctuated by 30% every few hours. Atmospheric composition shifted between breathable and lethally toxic without warning. The very electromagnetic signature of the planet seemed to pulse with hostile intent. "Sir," chirped Navigation Officer Pip, a small avian whose feathers were ruffled with anxiety. "Incoming transmission from Galactic Survey Command, Priority Alpha." The hologram of Admiral Stronghoof materialized above the communications array, the massive bovines. Expression grim. "Captain Velox, you are hereby ordered to establish a quarantine perimeter around Mortis 7. Effective immediately. The planet is classified as Class 20 Deathworld, absolutely forbidden to all galactic sovereignty species." Velox's angry tail twitched irritably. "With respect, Admiral, we've had 17 separate expeditions." "All dead," Stronghoof interrupted, his massive head shaking slowly. "The planet killed them all. Apex predators that hunt in packs, atmospheric storms that strip flesh from bone, plant life that actively hunts sentient beings. The geological surveys suggest the very rock formations shift to create maze-like death traps. This isn't a planet, Captain. It's a weapon designed by some malevolent intelligence to murder anything foolish enough to land there." The transmission cut out, leaving the bridge in uncomfortable silence. Velox stared at the roiling surface of Mortis 7, thinking of the 17 teams of brave souls who had vanished into those storm clouds. Good soldiers. Friends, some of them. "Captain," Whiskers said suddenly, his nervous voice tight with confusion, "we're receiving another transmission. It's from an unknown vessel approaching the system. Unknown configuration," Pip added, her surprised small voice filled with wonder. "The ship's design doesn't match any known sovereignty species. It's massive, and it's heading directly for Mortis 7. On the main viewer, the unknown vessel emerged from hyperspace like a cathedral cast in steel and fury. Gothic spires rose from its hull, and massive cannons bristled along its flanks. It was easily 10 times the size of the Silent Pounce. And it radiated an aura of barely contained violence that made every feline on the bridge unconsciously bare their claws. "Open communications," Velox ordered, his warrior instincts overriding his diplomatic training. The figure that appeared on screen made several of his crew gasp audibly. It was bipedal, like most sovereignty species, but there the similarities ended. Where felines were graceful and bovines were powerful, this being was something else entirely. Its face was pale, scarred flesh stretched over angular bones. Its eyes were small, dark, and utterly without mercy. But it was the sheer wrongness of its proportions that unsettled Velox most. Too tall, too broad, moving with a confident, predatory confidence that suggested it had never met anything it couldn't kill. "I am Captain Maximus Aurelius of the Ultramarines' 4th Company," the creature said. Its voice a deep rumble that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the chest. "You will vacate this system immediately." Velox felt his spine stiffen. "I am Captain Velox of the Feline Sovereignty. This system is under galactic survey quarantine. That planet is a Class 20 Deathworld. Nothing can survive there. We're here to ensure no one else dies attempting to explore it." Something that might have been amusement flickered across the human's scarred features. "Deathworld?" Captain Aurelius turned to someone off-screen. "Brother Sergeant, what classification did Terra receive in the Imperial Survey?" "Class 22, Deathworld, sir," came a voice like grinding stone. "Barely habitable even by our standards." Aurelius turned back to the screen. "Captain Velox, we appreciate your concern. However, my battle brothers and I have reviewed the planetary data. Mortis the 7th shows excellent potential as a training ground for our new recruits. We'll be establishing a fortress monastery there within the standard week." Velox's jaw dropped, revealing razor-sharp fangs. "Training ground? Captain Aurelius, 17 separate expeditions have been completely destroyed by that planet. Our best warriors, our most advanced equipment, nothing survives more than 48 hours planetside." "Your warriors," Aurelius corrected gently, and there was fearful in his tone that made Velox's fur stand on end. "Brother Captain Titus, begin descent protocols, full company deployment." Through the viewport, surprised, Velox watched in fascinated horror as the human vessel, a battle barge apparently, began launching smaller craft toward Mortis 7th's surface. Not probes, not unmanned surveys. Actual transport ships filled with living beings, descending towards certain death as casually as if they were heading to a training exercise. Which, Velox realized with growing alarm, was exactly what they thought they were doing. "Captain Aurelius," he tried again, "at least let us provide you with our survey data. The atmospheric storms alone will provide excellent training in adverse weather combat operations," Aurelius finished. "Captain Velox, I understand your concern, but you don't understand what we are. Confident. We are Space Marines. We are the Emperor's chosen warriors, forged in the fires of 1,000 battlefields across 10,000 years of war. We don't fear death worlds, we conquer them." The transmission ended. Serious, Velox stared at the screen for several long moments before turning to his crew. "Signal the fleet. All ships maintain current position and monitor the human landing operation. If they're serious about this..." He paused, watching the first human dropships disappear into Mortis the 7th's swirling storm clouds. "If they're serious, we're about to witness either the greatest military disaster in galactic history, or what, sir?" Whiskers asked. Volok's ears twitched as he watched another wave of human transports launch toward the planet's surface. Dozens of them, filled with these strange, scarred warriors who spoke of Deathworlds the way other species discussed vacation destinations. Or we're about to learn something very disturbing about what kind of species produces soldiers who think a Class 20 Deathworld looks like fun. The orbital bombardment began at dawn. Captain Theron watched through his helmet's display as Thunderhawk gunships streaked across Kythara's crimson sky, their heavy bolters chattering death into the writhing mass of tyrannid bioforms below. The Xenos had turned the planet's capital into a living nightmare of flesh and chitin, pulsing walls of organic matter that breathed and bled. "Brother Sergeant Kane, status report," Theron voxed. Static crackled before Kane's voice cut through. "Spore mines everywhere, Captain. The Xenos have seeded the entire district. We're cutting through, but it's slow going." Theron's power sword hummed to life as a hormigaunt leaped from the shadows between ruined buildings. The blade carved through its carapace like parchment, sending acidic blood spraying across his ceramite armor. The acid hissed and smoked, but barely scratched the paint. That's when he heard it. Crying. Not the alien shrieks of dying tyrannids or the wet gurgling of their spawning pools. This was something else. Something familiar. "Hold position," he commanded his squad. 3 Ultramarines took defensive positions while Theron followed the sound deeper into what had once been a residential sector. The buildings here were different, smaller, built for beings roughly human-sized, but clearly not human. The architectural style was organic, flowing, with curved doorways and windows that suggested inhabitants who moved with fluid grace. The crying came from beneath an overturned transport vehicle. Theron lifted it with one hand, his power armor's servos whining with the effort. Underneath, huddled in terror, was something that made him pause. It was a child. Not human, but undeniably a child. Feline features, golden fur matted with dirt and tears, wearing what might have been school clothes. Large amber eyes stared up at him with pure terror. "By the throne," Theron whispered. The child couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old by human standards. A survivor on a world the Imperium had written off as lost to the tyrannid swarm. "Shh," Theron said, removing his helmet. His scarred face probably wasn't much more reassuring than the skull-faced helm, but at least it was recognizably alive. "I'm here to help." The child's fearful ears flattened against its head, a distinctly feline gesture of fear. It spoke in a language Theron didn't recognize, but his helmet's auto-translator kicked in. "Please don't eat me! Please don't eat me!" "I'm not going to eat you," Theron said gently. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe." The child's amber eyes widened impossibly further. You're not with the Shadow Hunters?" "No, I hunt the Shadow Hunters." Theron knelt, bringing himself closer to the child's eye level. "What's your name?" "Lysa." The word came out as barely a whisper. "I'm Theron. How long have you been hiding here, Lysa?" "Since the ships came. Since Mama told me to hide and never come out." Fresh tears rolled down her furred cheeks. That was many darks ago. At least a week, maybe 2. This child had survived alone in a tyrannid-infested war zone for 2 weeks. "Brother Captain," came Sergeant Kane's voice through the vox, "we have movement, large bioform approaching your position." Theron stood, placing himself between Lysa and the direction of the threat. His bolt pistol was in his hand before he'd consciously drawn it. How large? Carnifex class, maybe bigger. It's moving through the buildings like they're not even there. The ground began to shake. Dust rained from the damaged structures around them. In the distance, Theron could hear the distinctive shriek of a tyrannid apex predator. The kind of sound that sent even experienced guardsmen running. Lysa whimpered and pressed herself against his leg. "It's all right," Theron said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. When was the last time he'd spoken to a child? When was the last time he'd even seen one? "I won't let it hurt you." The Carnifex exploded through the wall of a nearby HAB unit, its massive form bristling with bioweapons and barbed talons. Its 4 scythe arms were each as long as a man was tall, dripping with the dissolved remains of its previous victims. 6 eyes the size of dinner plates fixed on Theron and the child. It roared, a sound like tearing metal mixed with a dying scream. Theron didn't flinch. "Stay behind me, Lysa." The Carnifex charged, its 8 legs churning up the debris-strewn ground. Theron waited until the last possible second, then dove left, his power sword carving a deep gash along the creature's flank as it thundered past. The blade's energy field cooked Xenos flesh, filling the air with the stench of burned protein. The creature wheeled around with surprising grace for something so massive. Its biocannon arms swiveled toward them, the organic weapon pulsing as it prepared to fire. Theron grabbed Lysa and threw himself behind a concrete barrier just as the weapon discharged. Corrosive bile splattered where they'd been standing, eating through metal and stone like water. "Why are you helping me?" Lysa whispered, her small hands clutching at his armor. "Your kind, the stories say your kind don't care about anyone." Theron felt something twist in his chest, a feeling he'd thought the hypno-conditioning had burned out of him decades ago. The stories are wrong. The stories are wrong. The Carnifex's footsteps shook the ground as it circled their position. Theron could hear its breathing, a wet, rasping sound that spoke of too many lungs and too many teeth. "Brother Captain," Kane's voice crackled through the Vox, "we're 30 seconds out." "Negative," Theron replied. "Maintain perimeter. 1 wrong shot and you'll bring half the district down on us." He looked down at Lysa. The child was trying so hard to be brave, but he could feel her trembling against him. How many of her people had died? How many children like her had the Tyranids consumed? The Imperium taught that aliens were not to be trusted, that they were inherently inferior to humanity, that their lives mattered less than the smallest human settlement. But, looking into Lysa's amber eyes, Theron couldn't see an alien threat. He saw a terrified child who needed protection. The Carnifex rounded the barrier, its massive head lowering to bring its primary eyes level with them. Acid dripped from its maw, pooling on the ground mere feet away. Theron stood, placing himself squarely between the monster and the child. His bolt pistol seemed pathetically small against something that could shrug off heavy weapons fire. "For the Emperor," he whispered, and charged. The Carnifex's scythe arms swept down in a killing blow. Theron rolled between them, came up inside the creature's guard, and drove his power sword deep into what he hoped was a vital organ. The blade punched through chitin and flesh, energy field cauterizing as it went. The Carnifex shrieked and thrashed, one massive talon catching Theron across the chest. Ceramite cracked, warning runes flashed in his helmet display, but the armor held. He twisted the sword deeper, feeling it grind against something that might have been a spine. "Die, Xenos filth!" The creature staggered, then collapsed, its massive weight shaking the ground. Black blood pooled beneath its corpse, already beginning to dissolve the concrete. Theron yanked his sword free and turned back to Lysa. The child was staring at him with surprised, undisguised awe. "You killed it," she breathed. "You killed a shadow hunter, by yourself." "It was nothing," Theron said, though he could feel the strain in his muscles and the warning ache from his cracked ribs. "Are you hurt?" Lysa shook her head, then surprised him by launching herself at his legs in what could only be described as a hug. Her small arms barely reached halfway around his armored thigh, but the gesture was unmistakable. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not leaving me." Something fundamental shifted inside Theron's chest. The cold certainty that had guided him through centuries of war suddenly felt incomplete. For the first time in his long service, he wondered if the Imperium's teachings might be wrong about something important. "Brother Captain," Kane's voice interrupted his thoughts, "we're detecting massive bioform movement heading your way. Looks like that Carnifex was just a scout." Theron could already hear them in the distance, the chittering, skittering sound of a Tyranid swarm on the move. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. He looked down at Lysa, still clinging to his leg, and, confident, made a decision that would have horrified his chaplains. "We're leaving," he said, "all of us." "Sir?" Kane's confusion was evident even through the Vox distortion. "I'm declaring this civilian under Imperial protection. We extract her with us." A pause. "Brother Captain, with respect." "She's not human." Theron felt his jaw tighten. "She's an innocent, Sergeant. That's enough." As if summoned by their conversation, the first wave of Hormagaunts came, skittering around the corner. Their blade arms gleamed in the dying light, and their eye stalks swiveled toward the scent of fresh prey. Lysa pressed closer to his leg, a small whimper escaping her throat. Theron raised his bolt pistol and began to fire. Each shot was perfectly placed, explosive rounds taking the lead creatures in the head or center mass. But for every one that fell, 2 more took its place. "Sergeant," he voxed, lifting Lysa with his free arm, "we're going to need that extraction now." The sound of approaching thunderhawks filled the air, but the swarm was already flowing around them like a tide of death. Hundreds of creatures, all focused on the Space Marine and the small alien child he protected. Theron's bolt pistol clicked empty. He holstered it and drew his chainsword, its motor roaring to life. "Hold on tight, Lysa," he said. "This is going to get loud." Brother Captain Maximus felt the plasma bolt sear through his pauldron as he dove behind the crystalline formation. Around him, the sounds of warfare echoed through the crystal canyon, bolter fire mixing with the alien shrieks of the reptilian forces. "Status report," he voxed to his squad leaders. "Squad Tertius has taken heavy casualties," came Sergeant Varro's reply. "These Xenos bastards keep teleporting behind our lines with those damned cloaking devices." Through his helmet display, Maximus could see the tactical situation deteriorating. What had started as a routine training exercise had become a full-scale battle when the reptilian strike force had emerged from hidden bunkers throughout the Deathworld. The cold-blooded Xenos had been using this planet as a staging ground for months. That's when the fearful avian distress signal had reached them. High above, Captain Zephyr's damaged scout ship limped through the upper atmosphere, its wing membranes torn by reptilian interceptors. The graceful bird-like aliens had been fleeing their homeworld when they detected the massive battle below. "Unknown human vessels," Zephyr's voice crackled through the comm. "We are refugees from the Kepler system. The reptilians have overrun our colonies. We have younglings aboard." Brother Sergeant Castor looked up from his firing position. "Captain, those avians are heading straight into a reptilian trap. Their ships are moving to intercept." Maximus watched as sleek reptilian fighters emerged from camouflaged positions on the planet's 3 moons. The refugee ships stood no chance. "All squads, new priority target," Maximus commanded. "We're going voidborne. Prepare for orbital insertion." "Sir?" Castor's voice held confusion. "Our mission parameters don't include civilian evacuation." "They do now," Maximus replied grimly. "No innocent dies while the angels of death draw breath." Within minutes, the Space Marines had activated their jump packs and launched themselves into the planet's thin atmosphere. The sight was magnificent and terrifying. Dozens of armored angels streaking upward through the crystal storms, their bolt weapons spitting death at the reptilian interceptors. Captain Zephyr watched in amazement as the human warriors literally flew through space to reach the dogfight. "Impossible," she whispered. "How are they surviving in vacuum?" Her question was answered when Brother Castor's voice came through on an open channel. "Sealed armor systems, noble avian. We are made for the void as much as the ground." The Space Marines tore through the reptilian formation with ruthless efficiency. Maximus personally rammed his thunderhammer through the cockpit of the lead fighter, the Xenos pilot's cold blood flash-freezing in the vacuum. "Avian vessels, this is Brother Captain Maximus of the Imperial Angels. Form up behind us for escort to the surface." As the refugee convoy descended toward the crystal world, Zephyr couldn't believe what she was seeing. The human warriors were using their own bodies as shields, positioning themselves between the reptilian fire and the civilian ships. "Why?" she found herself asking over the comm. "We are strangers to you. Why risk your lives?" "Because it is right," came Maximus's simple reply. "Because the strong protect the weak. Because we are human." The landing was fearful. Chaos. Reptilian ground forces swarmed the crystal canyon where the avian ships touched down. The refugees, families with children, elderly scholars, wounded civilians, huddled behind their damaged vessels as plasma fire scorched the air above them. That's when Zephyr witnessed something that would haunt her dreams and inspire her species for generations to come. Brother Captain Maximus stood atop a crystal spire, his storm bolter empty, his armor cracked and bleeding ceramite. Below him, hundreds of reptilian warriors advanced on the refugee camp. "Brothers!" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Remember Macragge! Remember Terra! Remember why we fight!" And then he jumped. A single Space Marine falling like a meteor into the heart of the enemy formation. His thunder hammer crackled with energy as he struck the ground, the impact crater spreading outward like a spider web. Reptilian warriors were hurled aside by the shockwave. What followed was not a battle. It was a legend being born. Maximus fought like a demon, his hammer crushing alien skulls with each swing. When it was knocked from his grasp, he fought with his chainsword. When that broke, he fought with his bare hands. The reptilians kept coming, their cold tactics and superior numbers meaning nothing against pure, unbridled human fury. "He's going to die," Zephyr whispered, watching through her ship's sensors as more reptilian reinforcements poured into the canyon. But then the rest of the Space Marines hit the enemy line. Brothers Castor and Varro led the charge, their battle cries echoing off the crystal walls. "For the Emperor! For humanity! For our new allies!" The avian refugees watched in stunned silence as the human warriors carved through the reptilian forces like a blade through silk. These beings who looked so similar to the peaceful avians fought with a violence that defied comprehension. "Status of civilian casualties?" Maximus voxed as he punched through a reptilian's chest plate. "Zero, sir. Not one refugee harmed." As the last reptilian warrior fell, an eerie silence settled over the Crystal Canyon. The Space Marines stood among the alien corpses, their armor battered but their spirits unbroken. Captain Zephyr approached Maximus cautiously. The massive warrior was removing his helmet, revealing a scarred human face marked by decades of warfare. "I don't understand," she said softly. "You knew nothing about us. We could have been enemies, spies, anything. Why did you risk everything?" Maximus looked down at the graceful avian, then at her people, the children peeking out from behind their parents, the elderly scholars clutching their precious data slates, the wounded being tended by their kin. "Because," he said simply, "that's what humans do." Over the following days, as the avian refugees made temporary camp in the Crystal Canyon, Zephyr learned more about these incredible warriors. She watched Brother Castor teaching avian younglings how to identify edible crystal formations. She saw Sergeant Varro sharing his ration packs with hungry refugees. She observed Maximus himself sitting for hours with the eldest avian scholars, listening to their stories of the reptilian invasion with genuine interest and compassion. "Your species confuses me," she admitted to Maximus one evening as they watched the binary sunset paint the crystal formations in brilliant colors. "How so?"
"You fight with such brutality, such violence. And yet," she gestured toward where Brother Castor was patiently bandaging a wounded avian's wing, "you show such kindness." Maximus was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know what we call our home world, Captain? I've heard rumors. Terra, yes? A death world beyond imagination. Oceans that could swallow continents, predators that hunt in packs, storms that could level cities. Most species would call it uninhabitable." He looked up at the alien stars. "Happy, we call it paradise." Zephyr's feathers ruffled in confusion. "Paradise?" "Because it made us who we are. Every challenge, every hardship, every moment where we had to choose between survival and surrender, it forged us into something stronger. We learned that the only way to survive is together. We learned that protecting others isn't weakness, it's the highest strength." "And the violence?"
"Sometimes," said Maximus grimly. "The only way to protect paradise is to become a monster to those who would destroy it." 3 days later, as the avian refugee ships prepared to depart for safer systems, Zephyr found herself reluctant to leave. In such a short time, these humans had become more than allies. They had become the standard by which she would measure courage for the rest of her life. "We will never forget this," she told Maximus as they stood in the hangar bay of the lead refugee ship. "The avian people owe the humans a debt that can never be repaid." "There is no debt," Maximus replied. "What we did because it was right. When you reach your destination, hopeful, live well, build something beautiful. That is payment enough." As the avian ships lifted off, their engines casting brilliant light across the crystal formations, Zephyr took one last look at the space marines standing in formation below. These warriors who had dropped from the sky like angels, who had fought like demons, who had shown kindness like saints. "Captain," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from other refugee fleets. Word is spreading about what happened here." On her screen, dozens of different alien species. The leonine felinians fleeing reptilian slave raids, the sturdy bovine agricultural worlds under siege, the aquatic cetacean colonies being poisoned by insectoid bioweapons. "They're all asking the same question," her officer continued. "Who were those humans, and how do we find them?" Zephyr smiled, her raptor-like features softening with genuine warmth. "Tell them," she said, "tell them that somewhere in the galaxy there is a species that calls Deathworld's paradise. Tell them that when all hope is lost, when the darkness seems absolute, there are warriors who will stand between the innocent and the void." She paused, watching the blue and white marble of the crystal world recede behind them. "Tell them that, confident, humans don't just fuck yeah, they fuck yeah for everyone." Back on the surface, Brother Captain Maximus received new orders from the chapter. The crystal world had been deemed suitable for advanced training exercises. More importantly, it had become something else entirely. "Sir," Brother Castor approached, his helmet under his arm, "long-range sensors are detecting multiple refugee fleets heading toward our position. Seems word has spread about our hospitality." Maximus looked out at the Crystal Canyon, where his brothers were already establishing a more permanent base. A base that could serve dual purposes. "Then we'd better prepare proper accommodations," he said. "It seems we've inadvertently become the galaxy's hopeful sanctuary." "And the training exercises, sir?" Maximus smiled grimly. What better training could there be than learning to protect those who cannot protect themselves? As the twin suns set behind the crystal spires, the Space Marines of the Imperial Angels began their new mission, not just as warriors of the Emperor, but as hopeful guardians of hope in a galaxy gone mad. After all, that's what humans do. 3 Terran years later, Kythara Prime, former Deathworld. The morning sun cast long shadows across what was once considered the most lethal training ground in the galaxy. Captain Thaddeus Corvin of the Iron Wolves chapter stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Fortress Monastery, watching recruits from a dozen different species attempt the Emperor's Gauntlet, a training course that had once claimed the lives of veteran Astartes. Below, a young Felisari warrior named Zektaran bounded through the razor-wire sections with feline grace, while his squad brother, a massive Ursine called Kodor, simply smashed through obstacles that would have required careful navigation. Behind them, a nervous Avisari clutched his bolter with taloned hands, muttering prayers to the Emperor in broken Gothic. "Still can't believe they volunteered," growled Sergeant Drex, joining Corvin at the railing. The grizzled veteran bore fresh scars from the morning's live fire exercise, what other species called certain death. "Pack bonding," Corvin replied, using the term their alien allies had taught them. "Apparently we humans aren't the only ones capable of it." 3 years ago, when the Iron Wolves had established their training facility on Kythara Prime, they'd expected nothing but solitude and the planet's attempts to kill them. They hadn't expected a desperate alliance of xenospecies
fleeing Tyranid splinter fleet Kronos to crash land in their backyard. The first meeting had been memorable. Commander Volthari of the Felisari merchant fleet had approached under a white flag, expecting either death or slavery. Instead, Brother Captain Magnus had offered them rations and shelter, asking only that they try not to die on our watch. The revelation that these humans, these space marines, lived on this nightmare world by choice had shattered every preconception the refugees held about Deathworlders. "Your species comes from Terra," Velthari had said during those first negotiations, his voice filled with awe. "We've heard the stories. Gravity 3 times galactic standard. Apex predators the size of battle tanks. Bacteria that can melt through ceramite. And you left that to find somewhere more challenging?" Magnus had grinned beneath his helmet. "Brother, you haven't seen challenging until you've done the penitence march during acid rain season." The war against Kronos had cemented their alliance. While the refugee fleets possessed superior void shields and plasma technology, they lacked the sheer bloody-minded determination that defined the Astartes. When retreat was the logical option, the humans charged. When survival was impossible, they found a way. When death was certain, they dragged victory from the Emperor's own throne room. The turning point had been the Battle of Carrion Ridge. Surrounded by a tyrannid swarm numbering in the millions, down to their last ammunition magazines, the Iron Wolves had done what any reasonable military force would consider suicide. They'd fixed bayonets and charged. What their alien allies witnessed that day defied every tactical doctrine they'd ever learned. Astartes fighting with severed limbs. Marines continuing to fire while being digested by carnifexes. Brother Sergeant Caldor literally headbutting a hive tyrant to death after his chainsword broke. "They don't stop!" Velthari had screamed over the Vox, his voice cracking with something between terror and admiration. "By the void, they don't know how to stop!" But perhaps more shocking than their refusal to die was their refusal to let their new allies die. When the Avisari communications array went dark, the Iron Wolves had launched a rescue mission into a gene-stealer nest. When Tyranid organisms started boring through the Ursine defense lines, Tactical Squad Corvin had held the breaches with nothing but combat knives and imperial hymns. "Your kind," Elder Thyson of the Bovine Agricultural Collective had told Magnus after the battle. "You fight like the universe owes you something." "It does," Magnus had replied simply. "It owes us tomorrow." Now, those same species lined up to join the chapter's recruitment drives, not as auxiliaries or allies, but as brothers. The Codex Astartes had been creatively interpreted to accommodate their unique physiologies, but their dedication to the Emperor's cause burned as fiercely as any humans. The changes went both ways. The Iron Wolves had adopted certain Xenos innovations, Felisari stealth techniques, Avisari tactical flexibility, Ursine defensive protocols. Nothing that violated the sacred traditions, but enough to make them more effective killers in the Emperor's name. "Captain," came a voice from behind them. Apothecary Darion approached, his modified Narthecium designed to work with multiple species physiologies. "We've received word from the Inquisition. They're sending a delegation to evaluate our compliance with Imperial doctrine." Corvin felt his jaw tighten. He'd been expecting this. News of their multi-species recruitment had finally reached the wrong ears. "When do they arrive?" 3 days. Sergeant Drex spat over the railing. "Let them come." They want to see imperial doctrine? We'll show them 800 Astartes who die for the Emperor before breakfast." 837, Corvin corrected, watching as Zektarin helped a fallen bovine recruit to his feet. And they're not dying for the Emperor, they're living for him. In the training yard below, the multi-species squad had reached the final obstacle, a maze filled with live ammunition, razor wire, and acid traps that would challenge even full Astartes. As one, they raised their voices in the Iron Wolves' energetic battle hymn. "From the ashes of defeat, we rise eternal. Through the fires of damnation, we march forward. For the Emperor protects, but the Iron Wolves endure. And what endures becomes legend." Corvin smiled. Let the Inquisition come. They would find no heresy here, only the purest expression of human determination, shared with those who'd proven themselves worthy of it. After all, the galaxy had taught them one immutable truth. If you could survive alongside humans, you weren't just allies. You were family. And humans, as the universe had learned time and again, would burn reality itself before they let family down.
Hey.